eyes of attached that's going to provide a more lasting memory?
Well, those are the things that are much more valuable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the things that you're talking about in regard to the business card, right? It's those things that allow you to kind of find out what the maximums and the minimums are, and then you can design for that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't design for subjectivity.
Right. Okay.
Right? Because it's just it falls apart.
Yes.
Right? So what we need to do is we need to get an argument for you that argues for increased stimulation from banal objects in our modern day life that we kind of walk by through the highlight of our sensory systems, because the type of architecture, the type of environments are not conditional to the contemporary living situation.
Okay.
Right? So we need to find that argument for you to be able to use the haptic experience, the sensori, the highlight of the senses, as a way to deploy your architectural agenda.
Okay. I'm on board. I like that. It sounds good. But I get it. I know I'm
and for that, I think you need more.
I do. You're right.
And just so that we can start to have that stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, what are we designing? We're designing the object. Are we designing the space between? Are we designing the interaction, the programmatic interaction to bring you two people closer together across the dinner table? Mm-hmm. Or are we designing the space where we push people out, right? So like this thing could, like, depending on you position this, spirals off into 4 different kind of arguments right away. Like, you have your mode. I love the fact that you're like really getting into your mode and understanding that mode, inside, outside, upside down, every which way, right? And now I'm bringing based on what you're saying to us, that there's you're eliciting some questions that are indicative of your mode, right? And we're saying, okay, well, you got to kind of fine tune your mode a little bit here, and then we got to figure out how to deploy your mode, and what's the argument for deploying your mode.
Gorilla. All the way.
Why that tactic?
Why that? I just I had this idea that like whatever does come out, I want to build it and stick it in the middle of downtown and just watch people, molest it, kind of, so to speak. Like, I'm interested in that. Maybe not as the final, but definitely experiments up until that point. Pete?
Architecture as intervention. I mean, what is that intervention? Is that a kind of
parasitic?
Forget that word. What is that intervention? Is it like a kind of self-realization intervention, a therapeutic intervention? Is it a political intervention? Is it an economical intervention?
A stress intervention, stress relief or something, or bringing contact to the physical world in a place meant to do it, where it becomes socially acceptable to go grope an object in the middle of like a square. As kids, we play all over jungle gyms all the time, and it's no big deal. But as an adult, if I were to go climb on some buildings downtown or something,
those are the only people that actually know how to experience architecture. It's children.
Yeah.
And they're the only ones that have it figured out. And at some point in their lives, we just suck it right out of them.
And that's what I'm interested in. That's, up until a certain age, we are such haptic people, touching everything. It's the first sense that develops when you're young. And it's the first thing. If they say that, if you don't get born with the ability to feel touch, you die. You have like a 3-month period of living, and then you die because you can't feel. It affects all the senses. So,
do you think you have enough here to be able to kind of make these kind of juxtapositions, these kind of cross correlations with what you have here?
I think my knowledge of, not here, but I think what's in here and what I've experienced, yeah.
No, I know, but you're using that as a qualifier, which is good.
Okay.
But we kind of like, you bring out the business card, we kind of talk about stone, we kind of like cross-reference the toothbrush with the red onions. Mm-hmm. There's the same shot of the t-shirt, different material, same hand, relatively pretty, kind of inverted posture with the towel and the hand on the towel, right, both left side, color drawn out.
And that was one technique that I was playing with, was how am I going to illustrate these experiences through a photograph?
I don't think you should. No. I think that's the right way to go.
Okay.
But it's just how do you also recatalog these things? right? Do you just put all the things you touch with your left hand? So you get the pen up there, you get the business card, you get the phone, the towel, the shirt, the keys. You put you catalog all those together.
I see what you're saying. Like,
you know, do we take the soft materials and put them with the hard materials,
right?
Or do we layer all the hard materials, so the hardest materials, all the stones,
right,
all the woods,
or the materials I experienced at night versus
cloth,
day?
exactly, right? So the more stuff that you have, you know, different ways we can reorganize the matrix,
right,
and that's what I'm suggesting is that, you know, how many times can we reorganize this matrix for you to have a better understanding of, all of a sudden it's definitely not the toothbrush. It's, you know, you're like, oh, what is this thing? You're like, oh man, it's this plastic, intimate, cool thing. It's not even a toothbrush anymore. Right? You talk about, you present these objects as senses, as experiences. You don't present the objects as a wood gate.
Yeah. Maybe this can go down the road of what you were touching on last week with the program you guys had in, like a prototype where you put in all these different office scenarios, and if you need this, you need that. So maybe this becomes such a big matrix that you go through this list, say I want X, Y, Z sort of experience, and this matrix is so big that it starts drawing lines. Boom, here's your product that you might want to look at.
Could you do that? Just curious, with like an algorithm.
Yeah.
Is it possible to say sensory data here, condition here, run it?
So if
these are your options.
So no matter what you're designing, you have this like wealth of knowledge or wealth of information where you can just start singling out things and start presenting them across the table in design scenarios.
I mean, ultimately we have to get the matrix as big as we can get it, look at it in a number of different ways, kind of cross-reference it, tie down your vocabulary, and then figure out what we're actually deploying this against.
Okay.
Right, so that for you is like the focus of your agenda on what, and like kind of the physical output. On the mental output, you need to define what architecture is to you, what's good with architecture, what's bad with architecture, and how are you solving the bad through the use of sensation and the haptic experience.
Okay.
Those are your two areas of focus.
Solid.
Anything else? Mario?
I also hear a lot about like form, the function of form and the material, kind of the triangle of form, material, and function. It's kind of like wants to challenge basically what certain things look like and how they feel. So it's kind of like a line to me, like the way I look at what he perceives as form and function and materials associated with those things. It kind of wants to challenge that.
I want to challenge your visual bias. That's what I want to challenge. I want to challenge why you might have an interaction with one thing, but you won't have an interaction with another because you see it before you touch it. Maybe, you know?
Pretty big hill to climb though, to try to beat back somebody's kind of perceived memory.
No, yeah. And it's something we've been doing our entire life. You know, moving that way, and I think we're moving quicker exponentially. You know, the more we get into the computer, the more ads, the more graphics, the more movies. Always in our face.
The last thing that you want to be presenting is, this is my idea of X feeling.
Okay.
You put that in front of us, and we all feel it up for a while, and then that's it. Right? Like you can present X feeling, this is my idea about X feeling, but you never tell us what X feeling is. You just put the object out into the world and see what happens. But to do that, you have to curate. You got to know that, like, I want to achieve this X feeling, so I need a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a lot of that, and then I'm going to put that out there and see what happens. And that's built into your perception of the way that you read the world and the way you're
experiment to see whether or not it went right or wrong.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, is that for you what architecture is about? Like me personally, like I'm not. I don't judge my work by how close people get to the kind of atmospheric condition that I'm trying to convey, or the emotional response that I'm trying to convey.
You're not interested in that?
I'm interested in it, but to me, the success of my work is not indicative of how close of a person's response to what my intentions were. Because then to me, it's just third-person architecture, and I'm not really into it. No, I mean, I have all intentions of putting a specific thing out there. But if somebody doesn't come up with a specific thing and they come up with, if they don't come up with what I was trying to come up with, they come up with something else, that's even better. That's what I'm interested in.
But you still want to know if it's valid, right? I mean, I'm just curious if you designed it and you were hoping it was blue. Did it come out blue? Did it come out orange? What are you going to do better next time to make it blue?
If I design something that's blue and it comes out orange, or someone reads it as orange?
Yeah.
I mean, if someone reads it as orange, they could just have different perception of that. It's that's 1-to-1. It's not 3-to-1.
That's another hard thing that you're challenging too is opinions. Like everyone's formulating their own opinions now. It's out there everywhere. So now you're introducing basically your own opinion for someone else to munch on. But I think that's where the subjectivity needs to go back a little bit. But you have to be subjective in order to describe it. So it's like
Calvin Klein had a pretty good idea, making some what he thought were pretty sweet jeans. They kind of took off, right? Like he had his own idea of what jeans should feel like, what they should look like, how the stitching should mend this to this, how deep the pockets are, what the interior lining of the pocket should feel like. Something happened there where people got on and took off, right? So I mean, it hasn't. You can't say.
Yeah, but
that
he
it never
didn't. But his intentions of designing a jean, of those things, were super specific to him. But he never went out and said, "Hey, this is what it's supposed to be." Like his response is the product.
Right.
Then people, through the use of kind of fit, through the use of style, through the use of advertising, they make the connection with the product.
Okay.
Right? You don't. And that's where the subjectivity thing comes in.
Right.
Is it's like you need to address the subjectivity, but you need to do it in a way that you're not ramming it down someone's throat.
Right.
You just kind of formulate the subjectivity. You know, this might get some subjective arousal out of people. You put that into the world, and then you let people kind of, curate that themselves. That's 1-to-1 architecture. 3-to-1 architecture is like, this thing's supposed to be glossy and wet. And like somebody comes up like, no, that's like, to me that's, voluptuous and soft. And you're like, oh, fuck, I got it wrong. Right? Then you just shoot yourself in the foot.
Right.
Right? If you're interested in highlighting senses and dealing with subjectivity through the back door, if you're, then you have this response to architecture. If you tell me something's Gothic or grotesque, like that's, there's a whole lineage of things. It's like, okay, you're grotesque. All right, let's go look at some kind of stone-carved gargoyles, some random church. Right? Because the connotations that come with grotesque are so specific. And grotesque architecture goes back to Gothic architecture. And Gothic architecture goes back to classical architecture. And there's specific proportions that go with Gothic.
Evidence.
Right?
You can reason it without a doubt to prove yes or no. That's it. That's what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that there's a subject there. How do you present subjectivity? Like, do you want to have a conversation about architecture? Do you want people to come and formulate their own opinion about architecture, like someone would do about a Dali painting or a Bacon painting? Or do you want to be like, no, like, this is it, man. It's a Warhol. It's a Brillo box. I mean, that's your stance. I have my stance. I've kind of already figured that out.
Yeah.
And I'm working on that. You got to figure yours out.
I do.
I mean, if you want it to be third-person architecture, that's cool. But you deal with subjectivity a different way. You want it to be first-person, you deal with subjectivity another way.
Okay.
You just got to define what that is for you.
Okay.
And there's room for everybody.
Okay. I don't have a response right now.
I know. It's
okay.
cool.
Okay.
We could
You
see that like
understand
6 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else?
You got a lot of stuff to do.
yeah, man. Should have gone with the high rise.
I should have gone with the purple. That's cool. cool though. I think it's going to be good what comes out of it if I get a good process. Is that it? Yeah.